Good evening, everyone. I'm Tish Calamer, Community Engagement Manager at the Gale Borden Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. It is a joy to welcome you all to tonight's program featuring two local winners of the Illinois soon-to-be-famous author project. Before we introduce them, let's get the dreaded but necessary housekeeping out of the way. This program is being presented as a webinar and is being recorded. Your video and audio are turned off. If you would like to ask our guests a question, you are welcome to do so using the Q&A feature. We will ask as many questions during the program as time allows and follow up after the program if necessary. It is an honor and a privilege to introduce you to our special guests this evening, winners of the Illinois soon-to-be-famous Authors Project, India Powers and Stephanie J. Scott. This competition was started in 2013 to discover and promote local writers who were not yet published or self-published. Librarians across the state judge the entries and vote on the winners. It has since grown to include a teen fiction, Spanish language, and unpublished manuscript categories and is spreading to other states. So let's introduce our prize-winning authors. Winner of the teen fiction category, Stephanie J. Scott, writes young adult romance about characters who put their passions first. Her debut, Alterations, about a fashion-obsessed loner, see what she did there? Alterations, who reinvents herself, was a Romance Writers of America Rita Award finalist, truly an honor. She enjoys dance fitness, everything cats, and has a slight obsession with Instagram. A Midwest girl at heart, she resides outside of Chicago with her tech-of-all-trades husband and fuzzy fur babies. Stephanie was nominated by the Aurora Public Library. She will tell us all about her prize-winning title, All Last Summer, in just a short while. Then we have India Powers. Gale Borden Public Library nominated the adult fiction category winner, India Powers, and her romance novel, Demon's Bane. India Powers writes fantasy romances set in England. Demon's Bane is the first entry in her Mageblood Chronicles series. India grew up in West Texas. She has a BS in Languages and Linguistics from Georgetown University and an MA in Romance Languages from Texas Tech. Before becoming a writer and a stay-at-home mom, India worked as a copywriter, proofreader, and computer programmer/analyst. She's a member of the Alliance of Independent Authors and Regency Fiction. India now lives in the Midwest with her husband and son and enjoys home improvement projects, sewing, and watching sci-fi, fantasy shows, and movies. Okay, tell us about how you came to enter the soon-to-be-famous Illinois Author Project. Stephanie, let's start.
Yeah, so I was familiar with the award through a writers group, but I had a friend who is in Society of Children's Book Writers, a CBWI, who had said, you should enter it, and that they include indie published books, and it was this very cool thing. So I did it on a friend's prompting, and I published a whole series last year independently for the first time. And so this kind of was in the mix with everything as I was getting all of these books lined up and ready. And then I thought, sure, I'll do this, I'll send it off. And then it kind of left my mind for a while. So it was a very nice surprise to hear that I had finaled, and that was really exciting.
That must have been very exciting. How about you, India?
Well, since I live in Elgin, I get the Gale Borden newsletter in our mail. And as you know, I always read it, and I was flipping through and I happened to see a little notice in there about the contest. So I just kind of kept an eye out for it for when it opened. And as soon as it did, I think it was like the very first day, I actually went out and I submitted my book. So unlike Stephanie, who kind of forgot about it. I was actually checking the website constantly in the blog to see if they had announced any of the like semifinalists or finalists. And it was really exciting when I made the semifinals and then the finals. And then the day that I got the notice that I had won. My husband works from home, so I ran upstairs to tell him, and he was on the phone. So then I ran back downstairs and I grabbed a giant piece of paper and I wrote, "I won!" And then I ran back upstairs and I was like holding it and then showing him the sheet of paper. And he's really sweet and supportive. And he was like, "You have to frame it. You have to sign it for me and frame it." So I have a record of it.
Now, were both of you self-published? Your book was already out there? It just hadn't garnered any notice, or Stephanie?
You can go first.
So my book was self-published, and it had been out for a while, about a year, and I had entered it in a contest by the Fantasy, Futuristic and Paranormal Writers. It's a chapter of Romance Writers of America. And I actually won Best First Book, and I placed second in the fantasy category. So some recognition, but not a lot.
Fantastic. Stephanie, were you already self-published, or?
I had a kind of a practice book, I call it, a couple years ago. So I have critique partners, and we meet really often. We had done a series together that was kind of a practice. I didn't do a lot of the grunt work myself. I wrote the book, but I didn't really learn how to format and market or really anyway. So my first real stint was kind of this year. So I first published the first book in April. So I think it was April, May, and July. So I had the books pretty much ready to go. So learning how to do all that, and I publish them not just Amazon, but on the other retailers like, Barnes & Noble, Kobo's really big everywhere, pretty much outside of the US, Apple Books. And then because I'm not Amazon exclusive, it allowed me to be able to do some pretty cool things working with the distributor. There's a few different ones, but then you can make your books available to libraries. So depending on what libraries use, and you all know this, that there's like Overdrive, and then there's Hoopla, and these kind of different apps that libraries use. So Hoopla is kind of notoriously difficult to get into because, I don't know, they have long waiting lists, but my book is available in different places. So that was kind of exciting. Like I actually see a few borrows, in some of my reports and stuff. So I learned a lot about marketing. So for independent young adult books, that's like a very difficult market to do yourself, because most of the books are print, and librarians look at trade journals and Kirkus reviews and all those things. So you just have to do a lot more grunt work as an indie. But I really wanted the books out there. So my main goal this year was just to learn publishing and get the books out there. My main goal wasn't like a certain number of sales. But I do a lot of networking with other writers. And so I do like we have a newsletter, and like you share your book in their newsletter and things like that. So I was actually very surprised at like all these little different things that I tried. I would get sales. So I'm just happy that anybody who's not my immediate family is like buying my book. So that to me was a huge win, as I'm publishing a series, people are buying it, I'm learning all the systems. And for me, that was like the biggest win.
Okay. Where would you like to see your literary career go? This is the soon to be famous Illinois Author Project. So I would certainly hope that you two will be very soon famous. What are some of your goals and dreams? Where do you see this award taking you? Have you already experienced some successes that you wouldn't have expected, maybe 5 years ago or a year ago? Stephanie, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, my debut book was a young adult book, and it was with a publisher that did a digital imprint. So Most of the traditional publishers now do not have young adult exclusive ebook lines. They all kind of tried and fizzled out. So you can still get like a young adult book in print and an ebook. They do that, but just an ebook line. A lot of them tried that and then just it didn't work out for them. So my publisher is still around. It's Bloomsbury, and they still publish, lots of young adult fiction, but the digital line was very short-lived. So I'm part of that little nugget of history. But I did enter it in that romance writers contest, and I finaled as a best first book, which was like a huge surprise. So that was really fun. I mean, life and everything with the pandemic has changed so much, but when we did the big in-person conferences, this was Orlando. So Romance Writers has a big national conference and people get really dressed up. So I bought like a really nice, like a gown, like a nice dress, and I got like a feathered thing. And that's just really fun because I think you have to take advantage of those opportunities because
It's
so
not
much
often
writing
we get to dress up, especially during the pandemic, so.
Yes, I look back on those and I'm like, I'm so glad I went to all that stuff because now just the whole, that organization in particular is going through a really rough road. They're just not going to be the same again. So even going forward, once we're not as locked down or, I think things are still going to look really different. So I'm glad I had those memories.
Yeah, Romance Writers of America, I know that they are very big into costuming, cosplay, and they used to have very elaborate parties. People would dress as their favorite romance heroine or hero. The cover models would be on hand, a big deal. So
yeah, Romantic Times too. They were another big conference that is no longer. I think they were a little bit more the ones that would have like the cover models and things, but both of those, yeah, I feel like those are kind of a bygone era already. It's a little sad, but I'm glad I had those memories. So that was a really fun thing too. I feel like the romance writer community supported me. So again, coming from young adult, they have these things called debut groups, and a lot of it is people just making these connections online like Twitter, and it will be like young adult authors that are all having their debut books in one calendar year. And so behind the scenes, they organize to support each other to get events going and things like that. So it was part of some of this, but it's very different when you have an ebook versus a print book with a publicist and you're doing in person, all this and that. So I kind of feel like I had like my foot half in the indie world anyway, because I was learning more from romance writers who were doing like a lot of business in ebooks, whether it was with a publisher or themselves. So any success from that, I really feel like I owe to romance writers and readers because they really support kind of the indie spirit, and they read a lot of ebooks.
Great. India, what about you? Where would you like to see your literary career go, and what are some of your goals and dreams, and have you achieved some of them already?
Well, my goals and dreams, I would actually really like to publish a lot of books in the series. So my goal is to get at least 25 books written, hopefully. I know
Wow.
it's a lot of writing.
You won't sleep.
And it's kind of because the books I used to like reading when I was young were, they were series books where you would just have a ton of books written and set in a particular world, a fantasy world, and I loved that. So I do have a lot of ideas for books. So my goals would be to get all of those published, hopefully maybe some recognition, sales. And I mean, my dream would honestly be to get my books in libraries, because that's when I was young, that's what we did. Like every couple of weeks we would go to the library and I would check out a bunch of books, and I just have really good memories of that. I'd also like to chime in, like I was also a member of Romance Writers of America that same period where it was kind of in its heyday. And I was a member of Chicago North, RWA, and Windy City. And like Stephanie, like I would not be where I am without them. I went to a writers conference, the Spring Fling Writers Conference that Chicago North had years ago. And that gave me the confidence to actually try to become a writer. And they were just so supportive, and they just, you learn a lot about the craft of writing. You learn a lot about the business of writing. And then they even taught about how to self-publish. So everything I've learned, I learned through them in the beginning.
Yeah, I also started out at Spring Fling 2012, I think, where I knew nothing.
I was one of the coordinators. We had a great
wow,
committee.
that's so funny. Yeah, and I think I didn't fully answer the question where it said career goals. I kind of got sidetracked.
Please go ahead.
Yes, no, I just realized I wasn't really answering it. But I want to be a hybrid author where I publish some things on my own, and then I do some through traditional publishing. So I do still have a literary agent. I signed with a new agent last year, and we've had an adult kind of rom-com crossover, kind of like the chick lit book that's been on submission. And I also gave her a YA book to pitch. So it's, publishing's rough. So we're out there. We'll see what happens. But I'm writing for adults and for young adult, and then I'm planning to self-publish more books this year, have more young adult, and then moving more into adult, which is a little bit easier to market to people.
How did you decide what genre or content you were going to handle? What intrigued you about YA romance? What intrigued you about fantasy? India, let's start with you.
Probably I ended up with fantasy romance just because that's what I like to read. I grew up reading fantasy novels first, and then I discovered romance novels. And in the beginning, I was never sure when I first started out if I was going to be writing more fantasy or if it would be more romance. And I finally found a way to blend the two of them into my writing. So it really comes down to what I like to read, and that's what I write.
Okay, so you write what you like to read. That's
yeah.
I think I would probably just go to a library and find something, but that might be the hard way. But we're grateful that authors feel that way. Stephanie, what about you?
Yeah, when I first started, I really didn't know what I was doing at all, like so many writers, that I started some story and it had a teen girl and her mom. It had this whole cast of characters. And I just found that I really liked that. And this was back in, I don't know, like 2010, 2011. And YA was like super huge then. So like Twilight was at its peak, Hunger Games, like all that stuff. And I was looking back, it's funny, like all these writers I know, we all were kind of in this wave where a lot of us started out the same place. It's just some people, went a lot farther quicker, and then some of them aren't around anymore. It's really interesting, but a very big boom of writers happened around that same time. Some of it I think is because there was so much attention on those young adult books, like not even just books, but the movies and everything. Like people around my age, like we didn't have as many of those books growing up. It was like there was kids books, and then there was kind of like some teen books. Like for me, Sweet Valley High was already kind of old. And then there was like, thriller, Christopher Pike, like I remember. And then like so many people my age were like, you went from the kids books to like Stephen King, and there like wasn't much in between. And so now it's like there's so many things. I think a lot of us wanted to be able to like write those books that we wish we had. So I know for me that was part of it. The romance part, I really didn't think I was writing a romance until I went to that Spring Fling conference. So I just saw that there was a writing conference in my area, and I had heard good things about Romance Writers of America, but I was like, well, I'm not a romance writer, but it says anyone can go, so I'll just go. And then as I was there, I was like, I think my story actually probably is a romance. It's just with young adult, you usually have a lot of other like family issues and friendship stuff that comes with it. But I kind of came into romance a different way. I wasn't like a lifelong romance reader. I kind of read all over.
So moving along, tell us about a favorite author or book or genre and how it may have influenced your own writing, if that's the case. I think it is with India, being a fantasy reader. what are some of your favorite authors or books? You know, do you have like a favorite childhood memory of reading? You know, something like that. What's your reading history? Your profile.
So I started off reading Andre Norton. So that was her pen name. I think her real name was Alice Mary Norton, and she was a librarian. And I loved her Witch World series. So I started reading her probably when I was around 11 or 12 years old. And I just loved all of her Witch World books. They had different protagonists in the different ones, and I read every single one, and I wrote her fan letters when I was in 7th grade, and she was really nice. Like she would send me send me cards back with her letters were all typed up, and I just never forgot that. And then when I got a little older, I discovered Joanna Lindsey. And probably the reason I set my books in Regency England are because I fell in love with Joanna Lindsey's Regency books. Like my favorite was Love Only Once, and I read that one like a million times. So definitely those are probably my influences. But you know, some of my favorite authors, I like Alona Andrews a lot, and I also really love Alice Hoffman.
Oh, she's great. Yes.
Yeah.
Stephanie, what about you?
I just started to get into Alona Andrews. So I'm like, I read the Burn For Me book and loved that series, and I just bought a bunch more. But yeah, I read fantasy. I don't think I can write it. For me, growing up, I always read, always went to the library. I remember writing fan letters to the Babysitters Club author, which I think is actually a pen name. I don't think she wrote all those books. And I got like a form letter back, but I found it. I think I kept it. Yeah, I've read for a long time. I think in young adult, like more current inspirations for me, I really like the book To All the Boys I've Loved Before, the Jenny Han book, and that was made into a really successful Netflix trilogy. And I think that one's cool because the story isn't life or death, and it's not super angsty. It's like a pretty sweet girl who loves her sisters and like stress bakes. And then it's got this little bit like whimsical story. It's just such a sweet series. I was so glad to see that that took off, because I think that there's different things for different people. And I hear a lot of people say there's not a lot of books for that younger teen. So it's like you go from middle grade into teen fiction, and then some of it is like, you know, you don't really see 14-year-old characters or 15 that like act young because people want to read up. You hear all these things, but it's like there's kind of a gap in like the younger teen, like where they don't want kid books, but maybe they don't want super, I don't know, more mature themes and stuff just yet. It's just like that in between. I think her books are really good for that. So I always get excited when I see those books that like I can recommend to people, where those like, oh, well, my daughter's 13 and she's not really ready for like, you know, something that's super violent or, you know, issue oriented or whatever. So I like that there's books like that. So that is encouraging to me. And then I'm just encouraged by other authors a lot too. So just people who make it work. You know, they say, oh, well, I would write a book if I had time, but I have like, you know, a job and I have kids to raise. And I know people with like 5 kids and a day job, and they're putting out all of these books. Yeah. So they love it, right? So that like is a big motivator to me too.
Great. Well, let's get to the part that I'm sure everybody is waiting for, which is hearing excerpts from the prize-winning titles. So if you would first tell us a little bit about the book, including how the covers came to be, maybe. Let's start with Stephanie J. Scott, All Last Summer. Tell us a little bit about the book, and then what scene you're going to read.
Yeah, so as far as the cover, I kind of, again, when you're doing this all yourself, when you're the publisher, there's a million decisions to make. And so I actually really like the cover designer, and we worked together and did exactly what we wanted. But I also really wanted to do something different, and it's so hard to know what to do. And so in traditionally published books, all of the young adult covers, or like 90% of them, are like the illustrated covers that, you know, like a graphic or like a font and things like that. And I was told by many people, you can't do that. You have to do what indie books are doing. And I was looking on Amazon and I was like, okay, well, I'll make my books look like those. But then I'm not Amazon exclusive. I'm, you know, and I've been, so it's like, there's all these things. And then you see the same people who are Amazon exclusive with covers like mine are like, I think I'm going to change mine to look, you know, more illustrated. So there's all these conversations happening. And at some point you just have to decide. So I might actually be changing my covers at some point, but that's also the cool thing, that you can just do that. So I'm happy with them, but at the same time, there's like all these other marketing things that are going on when you're in the role of a publisher and the writer. And it's, you know, you just have to start somewhere and the decisions are very overwhelming. I'm sure India understands that too. It's like, you wrote the book, now there's like 100 other things that you have to do. But I think it's learning, and I don't think that, you know, you can always make mistakes and change it. So the story itself, I'm going to just read, it's like just like 2 pages at the end of chapter 1. And so my character, Lila, she's very list-oriented, very straight A kind of student, very into her boyfriend. And they're supposed to go on a study abroad trip to Brazil for like many weeks, like most of the summer. And the day before the trip, she decides to go to this party to surprise her boyfriend. And he's there with another girl who's going on the trip with them. And she's like, no way, I cannot go on this trip with another couple that's like my boyfriend. So she finds them at this party. So that's it. Let me find my place. Okay, just found them.
The pressure is on. I know it can be kind of daunting when you have to find a page in a book and everybody's waiting. Just take your time.
Okay. So Megan and I, we thought you wouldn't understand, Matt said finally. Megan and I, he said it so easily as if used to the pairing. This was supposed to be our trip. You didn't want to be with me. It was too hard to say I couldn't. You should have talked to me. Matt scowled. You were the one pushing me away. If you were paying attention, you would have understood. What? He shrugged off my astonishment. Look, the good thing is we'll be in different parts of Salvador on the trip. Salvador was the Brazilian city we'd be calling home in the next 24 hours. He said this all while hooked into Megan's arm. With his free hand, he let the swim medal dangle from his fingers, swinging in a lazy figure 8. Salvador, Summer, Matt and Megan. Matt and Megan and me, a squeaky, rejected third wheel. An uncharted future flashed in my mind. Matt and Megan wearing matching Brazilian soccer shirts, historic landmark tours and cultural events, all the activities Matt and I planned to do, and she would be there. Are you okay? Megan asked. I snapped to the present. Megan had asked. I stared at Matt, waiting for him to tell me this was a joke. Am I okay? I laughed, though no part of this was funny. He had no idea how deep this betrayal went. Matt was my identity as Matt and Lila. A surge of rage hit me like a gale force wind. How is it supposed to happen, Matt? On the plane? In Brazil when we're thousands of miles from home? They stood there, still joined at the arms like a united force against me, like I was the problem. The silver of the medal caught my eye again, dangling from Matt's fingers. Stupid, precious swim medal. For the last 2 months, I'd been his own personal cheerleader at his swim meets. He had already been with Megan by then. The medal swung back and forth, back and forth. A deep and fierce thing inside me reacted. I snatched the medal from his hands. I didn't think, I aimed. I chucked that medal right into the fire. The room exploded in sound. Matt yelped. Megan gasped. A chorus of whoa and no way came from the gawkers in the doorway. My medal, it's burning, Matt grabbed for a fireplace poker, an attempt to hook the singed ribbon, only it had already burned through. Nice shot, me. Staring at him, at his shocked expression, I let my rage have its way. Have a nice summer. I took the chaos as my cue to storm out of this house and out of his life forever. I moved past the gawk squad, some of whom were pushing forward into the room. At the doorway, my gaze connected with Aiden Pemberton. Pale skin, lanky and pointy features, he gawked with the rest of them. Funny, Aiden had been the one who told me about this party. Aiden, one of Matt's dorky friends from childhood, who constantly eye-rolled at me, who attempted to thwart my plans with Matt. Aiden, who never showed up to parties like this. Aiden, who smirked at me. I shoved past him, past everyone. Hot tears hit my cheeks. Ugly cries were coming, and I refused to shed them here. I made it through the front door, out of the house, into the street, and then I ran.
Wonderful. Well, there's certainly a lot to ponder and some suspense there. What's going to happen? Hopefully, Lila finds true love. We don't care if Megan does. We don't want her to find true love.
But I liked one thing about that is I like to not have like a lot of girl enemies. So there is some redemption a little bit for Megan later.
Okay, well that's good. Okay.
Because I'm big on friendships and stuff, but yeah, sometimes something just makes you mad.
Yeah, for now we're kind of mad at Megan. So okay. So when you're writing your books, do you have everything already plotted out, or are you discovering where the story is going to take them as you write about your characters, or what's your process?
I think the more I write, the better I get at it, but I'm definitely not an outliner where I know every chapter beat and things like that. It's just too much. So I basically start out with a premise and characters, and then you kind of build an idea onto that. So one of the books I wrote in my current series, I had this idea where it was very, very loosely like Beauty and the Beast, where there's like the guy who's kind of grumpy, beastly, and then she's like the perky person. So that kind of can drive some things if you don't have to know like every plot beat. But if you know that part, that's always going to come into play, where he's got to kind of play that role, and then she plays that role, and then maybe it reverses later. So I think sometimes having like a trope, you know, especially in romance, you have a trope that you kind of have a underlying idea of, you know, and then just setting and circumstances. I always like fun, like interesting jobs and things. So this one, they work at a golf range that's kind of like Top Golf. It's called Teed Off in this, but it's kind of the same deal. So it's like summer jobs. Like, what weird summer jobs did you have as teenagers? Like, we probably all worked somewhere terrible. Like, I think that can be a lot of fun, and where it's like your work friends become your friends. So that's kind of the theme of this whole series. I wrote like 3 books.
Well, if anything, you could always open up your own golf courses and call it Teed Off, because I think that's a cute name.
I hate golf. I end up writing about things I don't even care about. I just thought, oh, that would be kind of funny.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And congratulations on winning the Teen Fiction Prize. So next we go to India Powers with Demon's Bane. So maybe first tell us about how the cover came to be, and what's the general plot, and then we look forward to the excerpt.
Yeah, well, with the plot, with the book cover, I actually had met Kim Killian, the Killian Group, and so she designs book covers, and I met her through RWA, and I actually met her at some of the conferences. So I asked her to design my cover for me, and I spent a lot of time browsing book covers that I liked in the genre that was as close to mine as I could find. And then I just basically filled out her cover questionnaire, and I told her what my book was about, told her what I liked, what I wanted, and then she designed the cover for me. And you know, we went back and forth and tweaked it just a little bit, but I mean, pretty much she nailed it. So I have to show it. I love it.
There we go.
So it's romantic, and I tried to get the historical feel. I like having an image that has a little bit of something in the background, like of London, and so. So that was that. My book is a fantasy romance, and it is actually a time travel, and it starts actually in the Middle Ages, and it goes forward to Regency England. So it's about mages. So those are like basically wizards and witches, and it has a demon who's the villain. So my book is about basically a medieval mage who he has a mission to kill the demon who kills his wife. And that takes him to Regency England, where he meets a woman who looks exactly like his dead wife, but he doesn't know if she's his wife reincarnated and a second chance at love, or if she's actually the demon in disguise. So because I write fantasy romance, I'm actually going to start in the beginning just because it kind of sets the scene in the Middle Ages. So his wife is actually still alive at this point. And I'll just read a couple pages here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So it starts in Northern England in 1450. The punishment for treason rang in Julian Rutherford's mind like a church bell calling sinners to repent. Hanged, drawn, quartered. Swearing at his morbid thoughts, Julian reined up his stallion at the top of the limestone ridge. Behind him, his army pounded to a stop, the thud of hoofbeats fading until only the clank of chainmail remained. Hundreds of the Mage High Council soldiers flooded the valley below, a red-cloaked sea flowing past muddy white tents and dark smoldering fires. Today, he would end the war his brother started. A gray palfrey rode up to his left as Evelyn joined him. The hood of her brown cloak was thrown back, exposing thick honey gold hair that gleamed in the few rays of sunlight that broke through the heavy clouds. But her hollow cheeks and weary green eyes told a different story about lean days and the ravages of war. Julian's gut twisted into knots. He and his men, a ragtag band of mage-born rebels, humans, and half-bloods, outnumbered the opposing army, but every single one of the council's soldiers had magic. Only Julian's mages and some of the half-bloods had power. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I'm your wife. Of course I had to come." She glared at the soldiers below, and then her shoulders dropped. Her left hand pressed protectively against her belly where their unborn child lay. Tears welled in her eyes. "You have to win. We need you." Her husky voice broke over him, molten and sweet. Love and determination surged hot through his body. "Don't worry, I will." "You'd better. I'm a healer, not a miracle worker. I can fix a lot of things, but I can't cure death." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. Her answering smile was a shadow of her usual one, but it warmed him regardless. "Come on, it's time to go." He nudged his bay stallion down the slope toward the enemy camp. The council's soldiers parted at his approach, forming thick barricades on either side of the packed earthen road. Ashes drifted on the air, glinting darkly in the cold morning light before falling to stain the white frosted field. All 9 members of the Mage High Council waited within a 50-foot ring seared into the dried winter grass. Their luxurious purple robes were cinched with gold braid. How many villages could have been fed with the cost of their clothing alone? The Chancellor of the Mage High Council, a stately man with gray hair and steel blue eyes, stood at the forefront of the group. His fingers caressed a hammered gold disc dangling from a chain around his neck, a reminder of who was in charge here.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both. It's easy to see why you two won. Very vivid writing. We're definitely spurred on by a sense of adventure, either with the Council of Mages or the budding teen romance. So wonderful. And I'm so glad that you're both from the Fox Valley, from Elgin and Aurora. So let's keep it in the Fox Valley. Do we have any questions from any attendees?
I don't see any questions. If anyone has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat for us.
Okay, in the meantime, I do have a couple more questions that I can ask. So let me go ahead by asking, what's next for you? Do you have a new book that's in the works or about to be published? What do you have going on, Stephanie?
Yes, I'm going to publish the 4th book in this series. So these are, the All Last Summer is technically a standalone, but by the advice of a lot of authors, I made a connected series where it's shared characters. So it's kind of different people in each book, but some of them show up in the books and they go to the same school, but they all take place over summer. So I'm doing one that's roller derby themed, called Freewheeling Summer. That's going to come out in March. It's with the editor right now.
Mhm.
And then I think I'm just going to do it as a standalone. I originally was going to do it as a series, and it's at a tennis academy. I was going to publish that before this one. And then again, all these decisions, I had all these books that I had written and I'm trying to figure out what to do with them. So that one has a super cute cover I'm really excited about, where I talked about like the illustrated covers versus kind of like the people. So that one I used a really great designer, and it's just a very cute, fun cover. So it's at a tennis academy, more YA, but probably going to write another holiday book. I have a holiday adult, it's like sweet romance. So it's kind of like not quite as sweet as Hallmark, but kind of like, like a holiday movie. So I had a Christmas book that did really well. I did a lot of promotions for it, and it was just very fun. So holiday books are very fun to write and do programs for and things like that. So I think that might end up being a series, and I might do more of those. So yeah, I've got at least 2 books I'll be publishing this year, but hopefully ideally like 3.
Ooh. That's
And then, of
ambitious.
course, whatever's going on with my agent, basically you write a manuscript, you go back and forth a little bit, and then they work with publishers and send it out. And it takes forever. And then you hear back, and then you might send it out again. So I have things for her too. Hopefully I'll have some success in that area this year.
Mhm. Wonderful. Well, we wish you the best. India, how about you? What do you have in the works?
So I've written the second book in the series called Blood Vein, and I'm at the stage right now where I have to revise it. So I've learned from my own process that it's better if I kind of set it aside for a little bit, because otherwise I just kind of tweak it around the edges in my rewriting. And I learned with Demons Bane that, sometimes you have to be far enough away from it that you can actually tear it apart and put it back together and like rewrite it. And so that's where I'm at with that one. I'm taking a break from it at the moment to get a little bit of distance, and I'm going to work on a novella that was part of the series. And that one I have already, I've got it not quite outlined, but I have a pretty detailed synopsis and summary of it. So I know the characters, I know all the major plot points, and then I just have to write it. So I'm hoping I'll get at least those 2 out this year.
Fantastic. Now for each of you, do you put yourself in your works? Is there a character where so-and-so really is Stephanie, so-and-so is really India? Stephanie, we'll start with you.
I think there's always like parts of you that come out in the writing, but I don't know, definitely not just me. I mean, usually in fiction, you have to make your characters do like more adventurous or daring things. So maybe there's some projection there of like, oh, this person's going to do this bold thing. I would never do that. I don't know. So I think maybe there's pieces of you, but like, it's got to be more interesting for readers. So,
How about you, India? Is there a character that's definitely you or
Yes, well, like Stephanie said, we do put ourselves in our writing clearly. But in Demons Bane, probably the character, it sounds strange, but the character that's probably the closest to me in some ways is actually the demon who's the villain of the book. And it's because he's just like his sense of humor and just like he's not quite snarky, but a little bit. It's kind of a strange, funny way of looking at the world. And that's probably closest to my sense of humor. But of course, it's my sense of humor unleashed, like, the things that I might think, but I would never ever say in real life or so me, but a little like exaggerated. So like,
okay, great.
So,
We do have a question from an audience member. This is from Regina. She says, I am a writer and I sometimes struggle with writer's block. What would you suggest to help? So writer's block.
I say to read books, because sometimes I just need to get out of my head. And then sometimes I'll be reading something and I don't know what it is, if it's something closer to what I write, that all I can do is I just keep getting distracted and thinking, oh, I bet I would do a character like this. And then I start like itching to do something else. If I'm reading something like I do a book club that's primarily historical romance, I feel a little bit, that's more of escapist because I don't write that. So that just gives my brain a break. But then sometimes it's like you're reading something, you're like, oh, I got to get back to writing. But I think just reading books really helps.
But far enough removed that you're not obsessing about the book.
It depends, I guess. Like, what's your, like, I have some books by authors where I almost save it for like when I really need it. Like, oh, I know that book's going to be really good. Like that Alona Andrews series. So I'm going back to those Kate Daniels books, I think it is.
Oh, yes.
I haven't read those. I read a newer series. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to go back and I know I'm going to like that. So I already bought like 4 of the books and I haven't read them yet. Yes. Saving those where I'm like, okay, when I really need a good series binge, I'm going to like read those and I'm going to just read them all in a row.
So for me, like the way I've dealt with writer's block, I try brainstorming. Like I get like a plain pad of paper and I just start scribbling, like whatever comes to mind. For me, I used to struggle kind of like with writer's block and I wouldn't know like why I was stuck. And I realized that sometimes it's because I didn't have enough plot going on to drive the story forward. So by trying to brainstorm, I could get, sometimes that would trigger ideas that could help me maybe come up with a plot idea. And that actually helps me the most, just kind of the brainstorming process.
Okay, so you could see then where your characters could go and what you needed to write next.
Right, and the way, like my writing process is maybe a little different. Like I always have kind of, like when I get a story idea, I know my characters and I always know the beginning of my book and the general trajectory all the way to the end. So I always have the skeleton set. And where my struggle would be how to get from scene to scene. Like I would know the whole story, but I wouldn't know how to do like get from chapter to chapter to chapter. And that would be my struggle. And so that was kind of like knowing who my characters were, knowing their goals, and then how all that tied into the plot and just trying to keep the story going. And I would get stuck. When I was writing Demon's Bane, the middle was really, really slow. And it was like pulling teeth writing it. But I didn't want to get rid of it. And I thought, well, maybe it'll work if I just kind of tweak it, but it wasn't really good. And then I realized like I was missing plot. So I was writing lots of stories where people were just eating a meal.
Nothing wrong with that.
But it was pretty boring. So I ended up getting rid of all of those scenes and adding more scenes with the demons. So there was actually more conflict. And that's kind of really what helped me to just really get past my writer's block, to really get scenes that worked in the story and push the story forward. But I do want to say everybody's process is different. And I think that's something to remember, is that what works for one person and one writer does not necessarily work for you, because we are all wired differently and there are a million different ways to write a book. And the main thing is just keep trying and not to give up. And I think, you'll get there. So.
Fantastic. So one final question before we close. For each of you, what is your connection to your local public library? Okay, it's a little self-serving there, but we have to ask. Stephanie?
Yeah, well, during pandemic times, I haven't physically been to the library really since the shutdown, but almost weekly, I'm using the library app for Hoopla for digital lens. So I read as much as I do with audiobooks. And so audiobooks and ebooks, I don't know, it's just, I'm really into checking out what's new. So I'll like on a Monday, look at Hoopla, like what books have been added. I mean, it's like the same thing with Netflix or something, where you turn that on, you're like, what's new in Netflix? And you spend time looking at all the new shows, but you don't even watch anything. Like that's a thing for me. I like to see what books are out and tag them and then like do my list. But I listen a lot to audiobooks, but I'm close to one of the branch libraries. I can actually walk there. So
Oh,
it
nice.
was like a big plus when we bought our house. I was looking for places that had like good walking. I was like, I could walk to the library. So it's one of the first things I did when I moved to this city is I got a library card. So I'm a regular user there.
Wonderful. It's always great when readers and writers use their local public library.
Yeah, and I should mention too
No, let's
the
go ahead. Continue.
Windy City romance writers. Again, before pandemic, like we used to do a romance appreciation dinner where invite librarians and book people, like some bookstore people and things, to an event where we would have dinner and we'd give them free books. And it was this very cool thing. So I've been very fortunate to meet a lot of local librarians. And I believe I've met some people. I know I've met some people from Aurora, but I know sometimes they change. So that's been really nice to have that additional connection where we did programs with libraries. I hope that we're able to do something like that in the future. It's just, you know, people get a little zoomed out sometimes. You do all these Zoom things. So we decided to kind of set that aside for now.
Yeah, I do hope that we're in person soon, but I hope everybody, you know, stays safe too. You know, we want to make sure that that happens. India, what about you? What's your connection to your local public library, which I believe is us, Gail Borden?
I've lived in Elgin for over 20 years. So as soon as I moved out here, I got a library card. I even remember like the old original Gail Borden Library building. So I check out books regularly. I also use Hoopla. I use like the cloud library. I check out books regularly. One of the things from the pandemic that I really love is that you can do like a drive up. You can like put a book on hold and then you can just do the drive-through pickup, which is great. So I use that at the Rayco branch. And I've always participated in our library. Like we've had, when my son was growing up, they always had lots of programs. So we started off with the story time programs and we would have play dates at the library because they had this play area, you know, for little kids. So it's just been wonderful. And I've gone to different programs there and I've participated in the author fair as well. But that got shut down.
Yeah, hopefully we'll have that soon.
Yes.
Oh, we actually have one more question from an audience member, so let's make sure that we ask that. So either one of you or both of you, what is your favorite trope or fairy tale and how have you seen it influence your writing? So your favorite trope or fairy tale, how has it influenced your writing? So
I'll go first on that one. Definitely Cinderella.
Okay.
Is my favorite trope. And I didn't realize that in the beginning, but looking back, I realized that all of my favorite stories always have some kind of a transformation. That's basically Cinderella's story. And even in Demon's Bane, I think it is influenced there. There's a little bit of that because my heroine starts off as somebody who has a lot of kind of self-doubts and doesn't she has a lot of self-doubts because she doesn't have magic. So really the book kind of talks about how she develops and she comes into her own by the end of the story. So she's actually a very strong character, but it's kind of like her growth arc is learning that about herself.
Stephanie, do you have a trope or fairy tale?
Romance-wise, I think the enemies to lovers or enemies to more, I tend to like those a lot, and like because you get that immediate conflict and then they overcome it. But as far as more like themes, I don't know, it's really fairy tale, but when you had said Cinderella with the transformation, I always like that as well, like, or something that shows someone coming into like more of like a group, like they find a found family, or, you know, maybe they're trying to do things themselves, but by the end they have a group of friends. I feel like that's almost a theme in everything I've written, is it's like this collection of maybe misfits or people who didn't have friends and then they all band together. So I like that theme a lot, even in what I read too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wonderful. Excuse me. Well, we're coming up on 8 o'clock, so we want to be respectful and mindful of everyone's time. So thank you so very much to our two wonderful authors, Stephanie J. Scott, who won the Teen Fiction, soon to be famous Illinois Author Award for last summer, and India Powers, who won the Adult Fiction Award, also soon to be famous Illinois author. We certainly hope that we have met you on your trajectory upward to become completely famous Illinois authors. So real quick, if we want to be able to contact you, Stephanie, India, how may we do that? Do you have websites? Do you have social media?
Yes, we have a website. That's www.indiapowers.com. So you can contact me through there.
Okay, and Stephanie?
Yep, mine's stephaniejscott.com. And then I'm also a lot on Instagram, and then not really so much on Facebook, like author-wise, but Instagram, Twitter, I'm on there too.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks again. It was really an enjoyable evening. You are certainly two bright and talented young writers, and we look forward to seeing what you do next. And you make the Fox Valley and Elgin and Aurora proud, and we wish you all of the best. Thank you and good night.